Welcome to Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. Today we're talking about the difference that makes the difference, getting those extra 1%ers out of your people. I think this is a critical thing for most people in business is how do you get those extra bits and pieces out of people that make all the difference? And I certainly had that experience this week with one of my clients where the feedback we got, the client was they just said, look, you guys have been amazing in how you've been performing, and they were dealing with another contractor. They said it's like chalk and cheese, and it wasn't that we had done anything super exceptionally more. It was just the little things like giving them a bit of feedback here and there, keeping them in the loop as to what was going on, just listening, those kind of small things, and that made a huge difference. And I think these are little things that are those 1%ers that make the difference. How important is that in business to get those little bit extra out of your people?
I think it makes a huge difference, Damien. The fact of, if you take two things, if I look at my clients that I work with, for example, depending on the package or program, we might say meet every fortnight. I had a client yesterday and they're just a little bit stuck. I said, look, we're gonna meet again on Thursday night. She goes, really? I said, yeah, it's just for half an hour, 45 minutes, but I want to keep this momentum going because what I'm seeing is there's just a bigger gap. And that client was blown away that, I'm not charging for that. It's just providing a service, but it's a genuine, and I think people see it if you're genuine and not just doing it for the sake of it. So that'll lift that person up. And in the workforce, in the business I've run, that 1% that we talk about, can come about by many ways, and just showing, one of the biggest things is showing just a bit of gratitude and congratulations. Money's important, but at the end of the day, letting someone know they've done a great job, or you've put them to a challenge and they've come through and they've succeeded, and their motivation and persona goes from sort of here to here, and the trick is to keep it here, don't let it come back down. And that's where leaders, you need to really show some emotional intelligence in just working. And it's like plasticine, you just got to keep molding and changing it and be adaptable to what you see happening around you and your environment and the people you're with.
Yeah, I relate to that. It's exactly what happened today, this last week with that client I mentioned before. When I got that feedback, I went out into the factory and I said to the employees, I passed on that message to them saying, look, just to let you know, your efforts are being recognised, and that, as you say, gratitude and congratulations, as I've written down here, I think makes that, does boost them up and give them that incentive to want to do that little bit extra.
It does involve, as you say, that authentic connection, that authentic observation of someone and how they're doing, and motivating, giving people opportunities to shine. But absolutely, Julian, it's like the quintessential thing is then the reward afterwards, the recognition. But even just verbally that someone has done really well, J-curve, it's like huge jump in confidence, in general interaction with others, in willingness to share what they know with other people. So it just flows in so many positive directions.
Pete, did you have something you wanted to add there?
I had a bit of trouble with my mute button. I've got you never work with animals and children on TV screens, TV studios, and my dog is, for some reason, just wanting to be a little bit of so if you hear her, that's all good. I believe that the 1% is got to start with you. If you're willing to show that you can do, as Julian said before, that the person leading or showing does the 1%ers, then that sets a standard or a bit of this is okay. I've worked in many places where people are just there just because it's a job and a means to an end. It's not there because it's their love, and so they sort of hold back on the 1%ers because it really doesn't mean too much to them. So that's a difficult area, but it's that persistence and that as you were saying before, Ingrid, you know, that high five on the smallest little thing that they do. I suppose it's the same as like managing children. You know, if you're always into them because they've done something wrong, you know, try and focus more on the times when they do the right things and move on from the times that they've done the wrong thing. So yeah, the 1%ers are great, and if you know your staff do it 100 times, it's an extra 100%. So, but I believe it's got to start from you.
It is often, I'm sure, related to how we experienced our childhood too. You know, you touched on that, Peter, where we were generationally often just told what we couldn't do and not what we could do. You know, this generation coming through are just shining, but they're often looking for that positive reward, but are too kind of even scared to put their hand up to say, I can do this. I can do this. Give me a go. So often recognizing that there's someone there that's got like a bit of an inner child and a lot of enthusiasm and just a lot of shyness about making the request.
I think that's what Julian was talking about before, you know, that emotional intelligence. And sometimes if the heart and the mind don't connect properly, then how can you be emotionally intelligent? So, you know, it is the childhood's got a lot to do with it, and recognising staff in that area.
Yeah, and the other thing that a lot of, depending, you know, on the type of business, but you know, if you're a CEO or a senior manager, and you know, depending on the size, but if you've got X people at the different layers, you know, it's the old management by walking, where you do take, you know, if you say you're a CEO or whatever, and you take time out of your day, whether it be 20 minutes, and you actually go and talk to people. Now, whether say it's a distribution or manufacturing, and you walk the floor of the people that are doing the work, call it, and just to go and talk to them whilst they're doing their job once a day, once a week, lifts their whole morale. Like, wow, did you see the big boss came and spoke to me, and you have a genuine conversation. It really is quite powerful. And you see about, you know, the previous CEOs of Woolworths and some of the grocery guys would go and spend time in the stores, walking the floors and talking to the staff, because they're the frontline people. But not just that, it's that genuine connection from the top to the bottom that filters through the culture of any organisation, and you can get a lot more than 1% just by doing that.
Julian, that just brought, sorry Damien, Julian, that just brought back triggers or memories or irks within me with senior management from Woolworths and Coles. Right, we've got an area manager coming to our store today. So the store manager would spend extra wages, get extra staff in to make sure the store looked beautiful and all that kind of stuff, and which set up a false sense of reality. You know, but I'll move on from those tricks.
It sounds like you're carrying a little bit of baggage there, Pete.
I'm trying to unhook the parachute so I could walk freely.
It is important. I mean, I relate to exactly what Julian said. I do that all the time, where I will go out and, as mentioned before, go into the factory, let people know what's going on, just have a chat to them. And it comes back, there's a number of aspects that you need to pay attention to. There is one, as a leader, it's not expected that you get in there and do the role, because there's a lot of talk about, you know, does a leader do the same role as, for example, a labourer or tradesperson? I mean, they might have a willingness to do that, but it's not their role to do that job, and neither do those people generally expect that person does that. But that getting out and connecting with them and talking to them does create that connection, which inspires them to do that little bit extra, because they feel valued and important, which I think comes back to our basic needs as humans, this need to be recognised, to feel valued, and to have a purpose. And by as a leader going out and connecting with them, I find that you get that response where people do respect you, and when you ask them to do something, to put in that little bit extra effort, they respect you more and more willing to do that. Again, different example was with another client this week. They were doing an install, and they weren't able to finish in time, so it was left. And then when the client came and had a look, they weren't happy with how it was left. It was okay, There wasn't anything wrong with it, but they were concerned from a safety aspect that someone actually might break in and might climb on this equipment and fall over, which shouldn't happen, but that was the concern. And I spoke to the people doing the install, and I said, look, this is the feedback we've got. What we need to do is do a couple of extra things to make this safe. And they immediately jumped on board. They came back, outside of their own time, in their own time, they came back, fixed those few things and left again. And they had to drive an hour to get there to do that. So having that relationship of connecting with them enables you to get that little bit extra when those times are needed.
I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in a session that, when I was working with EDS, we'd do a comms piece from Plano in the States, and it would go out to everybody. And everyone who bothered to read that thing, and most people did, I'd say a good 80%, felt connected to the high purpose of the company, to the company values, and that cascaded down into elements of performance, every single week, because everyone felt connected and valued by management. And this is, the CEO and CTO, leadership. The biggest influences that I've seen on the floor of large-scale delivery environments, and I'm talking, large departments, defence, large programs of work, are that leader coming in, saying g'day, coming down every so often, having a morning tea, talking with everybody. It sounds small, but everyone who then has been approached, if they weren't strong enough to approach that person themselves directly, feels engaged, feels purposeful, and works better in a happy way.
A little story. When I was a meat manager for Woolworths, I took over a new store, meat department, and I let it run the way it normally ran for a couple of weeks, and I could see improvements that I'd like to add in, but I didn't want to do it straight away because it would upset the status quo. Over the first couple of weeks, I learned, how each staff member had their coffee or tea. And so I'd get in first thing in the morning and I'd write the list that had to be done. I would pack a big trolley so they could all it'll be there waiting for them. And I'd go downstairs, I'd put an order on, and I'd come back and I'd have a tray with everyone's coffee or tea. And I'd go past a bakery and grab some donuts. And they walked in at 7 o'clock and it was all ready to go for them. And there was a couple and those little 1%ers, I think, did have big paybacks. Staff would do an extra couple of minutes, or they'd go on their lunch break and fix a few packets up, as they walked past because they weren't straight, and little things like that. So, it's about equality, I think, and them feeling that, as you were saying, Ingrid.
Yeah, definitely. That those little things make a massive difference. It shows that you care. It shows that not only do you care, but you care enough to know what their individual likes are. So it's naturally going to attract them into the position and the values of the business. And extending from that is where, if you want that extra 1% from your people, is to involve them in, let's say, not running the business, but asking them for feedback and bringing them into the business instead of you as a manager or leader sort of leading, telling them what to do, but to ask them for feedback and say, hey guys, we need your help. The business needs your help. What would you do? Have you got any ideas to improve our products or services or how we do business? And as you said, Damien, a lot of people don't necessarily want to speak up because they're not intimidated, but they just think, I'm here to do my job. And extracting that or getting them involved allows them to take ownership, and they're going to be naturally more attracted to, get stuck into the position and what they're doing. And it's that whole interconnection from the top to the bottom, from walking by management by walking, talking to them, and then asking for their feedback. It ticks a lot of boxes, and once again, that 1% just magnifies.
I found that attitude that you talk about there, Julian, it has tremendous results in getting those extra percentages out of people, in the sense of, as a leader, I see your role as a leader is not so much to say how it's done, but to give the direction. This is where we're going, and then get out of the way and allow people to really shine. And like you say, asking those questions of saying, well, firstly, you say, this is where we're going, because that's your job as a leader, to decide the direction. And as an owner of a company, you decide the direction you want your business to go. And then, yeah, I found got tremendous results from people by saying, okay, this is where we're going. How do we get there? What are your suggestions? And people come up with the most amazing ideas as to how to achieve these things. And just by that process alone of involving them in contributing to how we get there, you get so much extra performance out of them just naturally, because they're inspired to do that. I think that relates to studying Kaizen, the Japanese art of continuous improvement in business. And one of the things I remember from those stories is back in, and this kind of flows from Toyota, when Toyota was founded, this is where those principles came from. What they did was they made the senior managers, they drew a circle, a 1 meter circle on the factory floor, and the senior managers had to stand there for hours on end, observing what was going on, so they understood what the other people were going through. They weren't even allowed to go to the toilet or anything. They just had to stand there and watch what the staff are doing. And I think that's another way of getting a great extra percentages out of your people, is by understanding what they're going through. And as Julian said, asking them questions, you gather that information. So another aspect, I mean, and this is where we mentioned earlier too, Ingrid, you talked about younger generation. And I think that also connects I hear a lot of talk about millennials and how they don't like to work and things like that. That's not been my experience. I really haven't had a problem with millennials. I find that same thing of asking them what they want to do, they're actually, really engaged in this, because they've got this freedom to think, as you mentioned before, that they haven't been told what they can't do. They've been told all these things they can do, and just giving them a direction, I found, creates these amazing results. Like one of the guys in one of the clients, he was a graduate engineer. He wasn't really performing. As soon as I gave him a couple of challenges, some things that inspired him, he just flourished. And now, he was there on the Friday when they were doing this install that I mentioned earlier. He was there from 7 a.m. in the morning all the way through the day, guiding. He was managing the engineering side of it. He was guiding the labourers all the way through. This guy's like 22. 21, 22. And so he was like really inspired, whereas when I first met him, he just wasn't that motivated, but he just needed that little bit extra, a belief in him and a challenge, and all of a sudden he became highly motivated. So
I think that raises...
Sorry, I was just going to say, I get a bit annoyed at any generation being generalised from, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Our parents were incredibly resilient because they had to be. They've been through one or maybe two wars as children. They'd seen their parents traumatized through war. So there's no right or wrong here. I'm just saying that it's really interesting to observe that the parenting that we kind of resented, we made sure that we didn't pass on anywhere, and it does create something different. So.
I think you raise a good point, Damien, talking about millennials. I mean, yes, whether it's a 21-year-old or a 41-year-old or a 61-year-old, it's very hard to generalise them. Yes, you could argue that millennials have been, brought up in a different way, that yes, they can do anything, and they may not like to being told what to do all the time, but it brings up the point of how to manage and get that 1% out of people, and being able to adapt your style either to an individual person or a group of people, what motivates them. So it's not like one size fits all. So for example, you might have a team of 5 people, and they have a attitude of how things are to be done. So you can go in there and keep pushing and poking and beating them with a stick, or come in from the side with a different approach. Where, as Pete said, he provided, coffee and donuts, and that worked for that particular group. So it's having the ability just to take 5 minutes out of your life and look at the pockets of people that are around you and adjust how you're going to motivate them. For example, give challenges as you did, Damien, or, some people may like to leave early on a Friday, little things like that. But having a flexible approach where you can. Now, if you're running an organisation of 80,000 people, you've got to leave that to other people. But generally speaking, there's lots of ways you can get that 1%, just by being flexible of the people that you work with or lead.
I think that comes back to understanding the needs of the people as well, taking, as you mentioned earlier, Julian, about listening to what's important to them, what they need, and then from there adapting your style to suit so you get what you want. And coming back to that higher level of leadership, of being clear about where you're going, or what I can call a compelling future. You've got this future in mind which you're driven towards, and how you see the world being a better place. And if you're clear as the leader, that's where we're going, this is how we're going to make the world a better place, people connect to that kind of ideal better, because it gives them more of a purpose. If it's just just to make money, just making money isn't really a great motivator. It's an important motivator, but it kind of gets tired after a while. What you need to do is connect to that compelling future, something in the future that really helps other people perform better, or helps the world be a better place. And then when they connect to that, they just naturally want to do that. Well, I do this with my son a lot, where I don't have to, motivating him is not hard at all. I mean, I don't tell him what to do. I've set some guidelines as to what is expected. And then I allow him to make his plan. And as Pete knows, Pete's Benjamin's karate master, and I said we was working towards his next belt, and I said to Pete and Benjamin, okay, you two work it out together. Benjamin, you've got your next belt to get to. Work out with Pete your own plan of how you're going to get there, when you're going to do it, and what's your plan to get there. And they went away and came up with their own plan and did that. And as you mentioned, Julian, before, about asking them the questions. When you do that, put that responsibility in, and it's amazing how much people rise to that occasion.
There's another little interesting, component here, and I completely have done what Pete's talked about, where you bring donuts and coffee. The next thing is to kind of hand that over and share that responsibility into other people, into other team members, so that they're actually owning and perpetuating that. And my point there is that there's an actual social matrix, and that social interaction, whether it be coffee, whether it be, okay, we've got a really heavy software build, we've got a large sprint that's going to go for, the next 2 weeks. Lots of people are putting overtime in. At the end of it, we're going to X restaurant, we're going to have a little bit of a sit-down lunch or a dinner, drinks, and celebrate. And I think that is also a fabulous reward.
Absolutely.
What you mentioned there, Ingrid, too, is important to note in relation to larger organisations as well. I mean, it's okay if you've got a small business, and as Pete was talking about, you can get the coffee and the donuts and stuff like that. But when you've got a bigger organisation, and as you said, thousands of people. I remember there was years and years ago, I was running a caravan manufacturing company, and that had 160 employees directly below me. So I couldn't manage that all myself in that manner. But I directed it to a few other of the more senior managers, saying, "Oh, this is what's expected of you to help motivate people. So my bit is to do this extra bit for you. Your bit is to make sure that you have these extras for the employees, to make them feel recognised and supported." And I find with those bigger organisations, it is part and parcel of setting the direction with regard to that support and recognition of the employees so that those managers actually do that.
It's also, inspiring a team within a large organisation to go, you know what, you have the responsibility financially and everything else to run a morning tea or a barbecue or whatever it looks like. But whatever you raise, I'll match, So it's not just you doing it all the time. It's actually, because people can also get lazy and have an expectation for it then. It's about going, this is how I'd like the spirit to kind of run in the organisation. It's a cultural influence then. And the buy-in is genuine because it's been run by you for a little while, it's been led by you for a little while, but then you've kind of passed the baton. And they know that that's expected, and they'll know that there's a contribution back.
That's a good point that you raised, though, Ingrid, is that expectation. If it becomes consistent, like Pavlov's dog, if you put a reward constantly in that place, in the same time, same place for the same thing, it becomes expected, and then it loses its power. So it does pay to mix it up a little bit, and sometimes not give that congratulations, because then people go under, hang on a minute. And I've done this deliberately, where I've not congratulated people, even though they've done a fantastic job, because then when I do it the next time, it has more weight, and it doesn't become this expected thing and then loses its power.
You're right what you're saying before about the expectation. There was a morning where over the last 2 days prior, when I was still doing the coffee and donuts thing, where they did expect it, and they started to relax a little bit, and so it was almost like I was losing that guide or what I'd wanted for an outcome. So I thought, well, then the next morning they can just go back to how it was. And all the staff walked in, and there was no coffees, there was no order picked, there was nothing done. I was doing what I had to do, and they picked up. They realised what they fell into. And you're right, before I think both of you, Julian and Ingrid, were talking about how to transfer that expectation onto others. And so staff over time did start to do things for the other staff members, and it really created a fantastic culture.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, Pete. And that word I was going to talk about on the back of Ingrid is a culture. And if you are a CEO or business owner and you've got 50, 100, 10,000, whatever that number is, it's almost academic to a degree. And you can look at businesses around the world. You take Virgin with Richard Branson. How big is that organisation? But his culture, or how he wants the business to run, feeds down through the people. You take Amazon. They can only have meetings for half an hour, and it's very tight. So all the people know that you can't. What is it? They can't have a pizza that. You can. There's some funny rules there, but that's the culture that comes from the top, and the right culture then feeds off each other. So it's like if you've got a kid that's being bashed at home by parents, he's a good chance he's going to turn out and want to bash people himself. So it's having that culture can make the huge difference of getting that 1% in a larger organisation as well. It doesn't mean it's all kumbaya and everyone only works 4 hours a day. There's lots of ways to do it, and be smart about it, where you just don't throw money and let the people walk over you. That's not a good culture as well. But having the same vision of where the leader, as Damien said, where we're going, and it's bringing those people along. Whatever that culture is, that's up to the leader to set that culture, which theory should lead to that 1%ers.
Yeah, that's an important word, Julian, because I have 3 goals for business, or 3 categories of where a business should set goals. The first one is in its finances, so its goals in relation to its finances. Second is in relation to its operations, how it operates. And the third one, as you talked about, the category is its culture. What goals do you have for your culture? Because that's such a critical aspect of the performance of a business. So it's a great point in having that, creating that culture of we do better. And I often use those words with people and says we have a higher standard. They're words that I use at home, and certainly words I use in business. As an organisation, this organisation has a higher standard. And when you say that, again, that I think that operates from your reticular activating system in your brain. If you have that focus, it's automatic. I find it creates that switch in someone's mind where they start to focus, okay, no, I do have a higher standard. And that's what they start to do.
As opposed to, it's not my job. The amount of times I've heard that in places, organisation, workplaces, you know, and that culture there is so cancerous. You know, even though it's a metre away and you can actually help that person, you know, the old, it's not my job. That culture is hard to break.
Those words would get you fired in an organisation that I work with. I haven't heard. You know, I hear what you're saying. I honestly haven't heard those words for a while, which was good. It's interesting you mentioned that. But yeah,
demarcation comes to mind.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's not my job. Yeah, your job's not here then. So that'll be my response.
Something I constantly battle with in the public sector and going in, you know, as a consultant on major programs, and there's been a huge shift in the last sort of 20 years around ownership of your function, your job description in government, and I'm talking particularly not so much in the senior levels, but in the sort of APS, general levels. But you still get these very myopic, I can't do anything outside of my role, I won't do it. And they create the most challenging cultural circumstances, really highly disruptive, particularly when you've got a largely high-performing team or medium to high-performing team, and then there's this one person that's sitting in there dragging the rest of the team culture and dynamic down. Wow, really, really challenging.
Yeah, I have had that experience a few years ago in relation to dealing with government organisations, particularly government departments, I should say, and where there is that mindset of this is my particular role and not stepping out of that, and not being able to see beyond doing that little bit extra. I haven't dealt with that for a little while, but it's certainly something that did exist, and it can be challenging for a team when you're dealing with one person. Although I have found that most people on the team that are motivated recognise that, and over time that person kind of tends to move away because they just don't fit anymore.
That can happen, but you also don't want to, socially isolate someone in the workplace. And there is often a reason. They say, or what's commonly being talked about is these days is you don't know what's happening in somebody else's life, until you engage and ask. And often I've asked, and often I've found horrors. So, but still, until that's resolved, until you're in there and you're engaged and you're learning each person's characters and what their strengths are, that's a highly disruptive, highly disruptive force.
Creating that safe place for them as well, and in those circumstances where someone has got something else going on in their life, I've found that, I know I've been on both ends of that, where I've had to deal with people that have had something going on in their life, and it wasn't known until I sat down and had a chat and said, hey, look, what's going on? And same token too, I've actually been in that position where I've had stuff going in my life which was disruptive to my work, and I've been grateful enough that I'm very grateful that the people that I was involved with at that time actually took an understanding of that and made allowance for that as well. So, but having that, and this comes back to what Julian raised initially at the start of this show, was that having that ability to listen, to ask questions and listen, you gather more information.
And doing a bit of goal setting with that person can often flick them around quite quickly because they've not had any attention for whatever reason in the workplace, and obviously or potentially the wrong kind of attention in their private lives. So there you go.
It's almost like a HR continuum that's going on 120% of the time. You've always it's a recipe. Each individual's got so much stuff mentally and emotionally going on, and to manage that properly. In a lot of my experiences with workplaces and stuff, that didn't start from the top, and people did get lost and isolated and end up leaving. It's that willing and wanting to actually have that relationship and talk with someone. And if outside your scope, then you obviously outsource it. It's we're all humans and we're all different, and we're not robots. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in a massive integration project, and the project manager and the program manager that hired me, the project manager, she had so much, she was divorcing, she had so many issues running. But every meeting, I was noticing that we were having with some external vendors, kind of the weekly or twice weekly meetings, she'd have arguments with them. And I went to her first, and I said, "Can I do something to take the pain out of this for you?" And she just persisted with this, and in the end, I ended up leading the integration talks with the vendors, because they were ready to just. I mean, they were trying so hard. They weren't getting positive direction. They weren't getting any direction. They were just being yelled at every day. And so our program was like 3 months behind when I started, and basically got it back on track within a month, just through stopping that kind of disruptive behaviour. And she ended up being walked, which is unfortunate. The lady probably deserved some support, but she was just so erratic and so painful. And I think there are lines in that if you can't be responsive and responsible in the role that you're supposed to be leading in, then really you should walk away. You're not doing your job. You're not leading. You're not having positive conversations. You're destroying something, and it's expensive. It's a multi-million-dollar, thing.
It's an important point that you raised there, though, Ingrid. As the leader, your first responsibility is to that objective of the organisation. After that comes the individual people within that. You have a responsibility to look after them, but that doesn't supersede the responsibility to the objectives of the business. Whether it's your own business, you have your own objectives that you're working towards, or whether it's a bigger organisation that has certain goals, those objectives do come first, and the person's objectives, that yes, to the best extent you want to help them move forward, but there comes a point where you do have a line, and if that line gets crossed, then it might be a case of having to let that person go.
I think it's about wearing the right hat at the right time. Some people, we've got the work hat on now, and this is what our objective is, and trying to balance that. If don't lose your human side, but the focus is important.
I think the example that I was trying to sort of hone in on there was, you need to know when you're not being a positive influence and not getting the outcomes that you were hired to do, and be circumspect about them and readdress them. And if you can't readdress them and succeed with that, then you need to walk. Because for example, in ICT, if you're building software or you're integrating multiple software components, and there's hardware, and there's you've got lots of specialist resources around you that are also expensive, it's not appropriate to be doing that, and to undermine an outcome, especially when you consider it's public money. in the end.
Very much so. All right, we're starting to run out of time. Do you want to give us one each takeaway for people as to how to get the best those extra 1%ers out of their people?
I think, as I said, I think understanding people as much as you can on an individual, or if not on a group basis, with the people you're working with, and what really motivates them. Whether that's, some people are motivated by money, but if we park money for a minute, because you can't always rely on money, is what you can do as a leader to connect with those people and understand what their motivation is, and also by contributing simply by talking and spending some time with them that you wouldn't normally do, putting yourself out of what your busy day might be, just to connect with them a little bit more than via email or through company meetings on a monthly basis, those sort of things.
I'd say meet them where they are, be authentic as you do so, but be very clear about communicating where you want to go, and take them along with you in heart and mind.
Yeah, I totally agree there. To set the example yourself, to do the 1%ers, for yourself, for the business, for them as well, and then teach them how to do that. But yeah, if you don't expect to do it, then it's going to be hard for them. Set the example.
Fantastic, great advice. Well, this has been exceptional effort. This has been Exceptional Effort Business Sunday with Julian White, Ingrid Colquitt, and Pete Keogh, and myself, Damien Andrews. We've been discussing the difference that makes a difference, how to get those extra 1%ers out of people. Thank you very much, guys, and we look forward to our show next week.